High Admiral Kexlar stood motionless on the bridge of the Valkyrie dreadnought Eternal Dominion, his iridescent scales reflecting the stark lighting as he studied the peculiar vessel before him. The human diplomatic ship hung in space like a naked creature, no crystalline armor plating, no biomechanical defensive layers, not even basic carapace reinforcement. Just smooth, manufactured metal and what appeared to be simple radiation shielding. Impossible, he chittered to his second-in-command, Commander Vexna. How have they survived interstellar travel in such primitive vessels? Vexna's sensory frills rippled with barely concealed disdain. The data we gathered suggests their entire species lacks natural armor, Admiral. They evolved on a relatively stable planet with moderate gravity. Their bodies are supported by internal calcium structures rather than proper exoskeletons. The bridge crew exchanged looks of mingled pity and contempt. In the 1,000 cycles since the Valkyrie had achieved spaceflight, they'd encountered dozens of species. All had evolved some form of protective outer layer, be it shells, plates, or crystalline growths, to survive their homeworld's harsh conditions. It was simply the way of things. Perhaps they compensate with advanced shield technology, Kexlar mused, but the sensor readings showed nothing of the sort. Just basic deflectors for space debris. The communications officer's voice cut through his thoughts. Admiral, they're hailing us again. The human representative insists on proceeding with the scheduled diplomatic meeting. Kexlar's primary hearts clenched with something approaching concern. The Valkyrie Federation's first contact protocols were clear. Peaceful dialogue was always the first approach. But allowing these fragile creatures aboard seemed almost cruel. One wrong step on their reinforced deck plating could shatter their brittle bones. Very well, he decided, but triple the gravity compensators in the diplomatic chamber. We don't want to accidentally crush our guests. When the human delegation arrived, Kexlar's concern turned to fascination. They moved with surprising grace despite their obvious biological disadvantages. The lead diplomat, who introduced herself as Ambassador Sarah Chen, showed no sign of strain under the artificial gravity that would have challenged even a Valkyrie juvenile. We appreciate your willingness to meet, Admiral, Chen said, her soft features arranged in what his psychology training suggested was a peaceful expression. The United Earth Federation looks forward to establishing diplomatic relations with the Valkyrie. Kexlar couldn't help but notice how exposed she seemed in her formal attire, no protective gear beyond a thin fabric suit. His warrior instincts screamed that this had to be some kind of trap. No species would willingly make themselves so vulnerable. Before we proceed, Ambassador, he clicked carefully, I must ask, why do you not wear protective armor? Surely your species has developed some artificial means of compensation for your natural limitations. Chen's expression shifted slightly. Limitations, Admiral. Your lack of biological armor. Your exposed epidermis. Surely you understand how concerning this appears to us. The ambassador's lips curved upward, but something in her eyes made Kexlar's secondary hearts skip a beat. Admiral, I believe you're operating under a misconception. Humans don't need armor because we evolved something far more valuable, adaptability. Adaptability cannot stop a plasma bolt, Commander Vexna interjected sharply. No, Chen agreed, but it can help us survive one. Perhaps a demonstration would help clarify. Before Kexlar could respond, one of his honor guards, young and overeager, activated his arm-mounted defense spike. The crystalline weapon deployed with a sharp crack, its tip grazing the ambassador's arm. The nearby Valkyrie recoiled, expecting to see the fragile human collapse. Instead, Chen simply looked down at the shallow cut, which had already stopped bleeding. Interesting response, she said calmly. Though I should warn you, human epidermis has remarkable healing properties. This will be gone in a few days, and while we may look soft, Admiral, I assure you, humanity's strength lies in far more than external protection. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Kexlar suddenly realized that what he'd initially taken for vulnerability might be something else entirely. After all, what kind of species could evolve to survive without armor and still reach the stars? "I believe," he said slowly, "we have much to learn about each other, Ambassador." Chen's smile remained unchanged, but her eyes held a glint of something ancient and resilient. "Indeed we do, Admiral. Indeed we do." Looking back, Kexlar would remember this as the moment he first understood that the Valkyrie Federation had made a crucial error in judgment. They had mistaken the absence of armor for weakness, never considering that perhaps, just perhaps, humans had evolved beyond the need for it entirely. The diplomatic meeting continued, but a new undercurrent of tension ran beneath every word. The Valkyrie's certainty in their superiority had been shaken, and in its place grew something they hadn't felt in generations: doubt. And as the human delegation prepared to return to their ship, Ambassador Chen paused at the airlock. "One last thing, Admiral. You might be interested to know that humans have a saying, 'What doesn't kill us makes us stronger.' Consider that when you think about why we don't need armor." The airlock sealed behind them, leaving Kexlar to contemplate a disturbing possibility. Had his species evolved to survive their harsh world by developing protection, while humans had evolved to survive by becoming virtually unkillable without it? The incident in the diplomatic chamber haunted Admiral Kexlar's dreams. 2 lunar cycles had passed since the meeting with Ambassador Chen, and the Valkyrie Intelligence Division had been working relentlessly to understand their new potential adversaries. Each report that crossed his desk made him increasingly uneasy. "Impossible," he muttered, reviewing the latest findings in his private quarters aboard the Eternal Dominion. "Computer, verify these readings again." The holographic display flickered, showing footage of human emergency responders entering a burning building without protective exoskeletons. The structure's temperature readings were well above what should have been survivable for unarmored organisms. Commander Vexna's voice came through his private channel. "Admiral, you need to see this. We've intercepted civilian broadcasts from their colony on Mars." The footage shifted to show humans working in a harsh Martian environment. Their protective suits were remarkably thin compared to Valkyrie environmental armor, yet they moved with unprecedented speed and agility. More disturbing were the emergency protocols. In case of suit breach, humans could reportedly survive up to 2 minutes in the lethal atmosphere. "How?" Kexlar demanded, his scales shifting colors with agitation. "Their bodies should collapse instantly." "That's not all," Vexna continued. "We've confirmed reports of human survival in conditions that would kill any rational species: extreme temperatures, crushing depths, toxic environments. They don't just endure these conditions, they adapt to them." The display showed more footage. Humans diving to ocean depths that would shatter Valkyrie pressure suits, surviving in Arctic conditions that would freeze their crystalline armor brittle, and even recovering from injuries that should have been fatal. "Their medical technology must be exceptional," Kexlar reasoned, desperately seeking logical explanations. "No, Admiral. Their medical technology is surprisingly basic compared to ours. It's their bodies that are exceptional. They possess redundant organs, rapid cellular regeneration, and something their scientists call neuroplasticity. Their very brains can rewire themselves to adapt to trauma." Kexlar's secondary hearts began racing as the implications sank in. The Valkyrie had spent millennia perfecting their biological armor, engineering their crystalline exoskeletons to withstand any attack. But humans had evolved to survive without such protection. What kind of evolutionary pressure could create such resilience? A new report flashed across his screen. Footage from a human sporting event. He watched in horror as the athletes deliberately subjected themselves to punishing physical conditions. "They do this for entertainment. They call it training," Vexna explained. "Their bodies actually grow stronger in response to stress and damage. Some of their warriors deliberately break their calcium structures to make them heal stronger." The Admiral's scales paled. "Have you reviewed their military capabilities? That's why I contacted you." We found their combat doctrine disturbing. While we focus on protection and overwhelming force, they emphasize endurance and adaptability. Their soldiers train to continue fighting even with severe injuries. They have documented cases of humans continuing combat after losing limbs, suffering internal damage, or being exposed to radiation levels that would kill our warriors instantly. The display showed historical footage of human conflicts. Kexlar watched as soldiers dragged wounded comrades across battlefields, as civilians survived bombing raids by adapting to live underground, as entire populations endured sieges through sheer stubborn determination. They're not just physically resilient, Vexna continued, her voice troubled. Their psychological endurance is unprecedented. While our warriors rely on the confidence of their armor, humans seem to grow more determined when facing impossible odds. Kexlar remembered Ambassador Chen's words about adaptation. He had dismissed them as diplomatic posturing. But now, what are you saying, Commander? I'm saying that we may have fundamentally misunderstood the nature of strength, Admiral. Our species evolved to survive through protection. Humans evolved to survive through regeneration and adaptation. They don't need armor because their entire biology is oriented toward enduring and overcoming damage. The Admiral stared at the final piece of footage. A human child falling, scraping its knees, crying briefly, then getting up to continue playing. The simple resilience of the action struck him as more alien than any advanced technology. "Recall the fleet," he ordered suddenly. "All ships. Full retreat to defensive positions." "Admiral, if we've misunderstood their basic biology so completely, what else have we missed? We need to reassess everything we thought we knew about humans. Because if these reports are accurate, we're not dealing with a vulnerable species that lacks armor. We're dealing with something far more dangerous, a species that evolved beyond the need for it." As the orders went out, Kexler remembered an old Valkyrie military axiom. The most dangerous enemy is the one you underestimate. Looking at the mounting evidence of human resilience, he feared they had done exactly that. And he couldn't shake the feeling that if conflict came, the Valkyrie's magnificent armor might prove inadequate against an enemy that had learned to survive without it. The invasion of New Eden Colony was supposed to be a swift demonstration of Valkyrie military superiority. The hawkish faction of the High Command had overruled Admiral Kexlar's warnings, dismissing his concerns as overcautious. Their logic seemed sound. A small human settlement, minimal defenses, no significant military presence. A perfect target to prove that, despite their peculiar resilience, humans were still no match for Valkyrie might. They were wrong. General Zexthor watched from his command ship as the first wave of dropships descended through New Eden's atmosphere. The colony sprawled across a valley surrounded by jagged mountains, its environmental domes gleaming under the binary stars. Their intelligence suggested a population of merely 10,000 civilians. "Begin the demonstration," he ordered. "Disable their atmospheric generators." Precision strikes took out the colony's main life support systems. By Valkyrie calculations, the unprotected humans would have minutes at most to surrender before the hostile atmosphere became lethal. They expected immediate capitulation. Instead, the humans adapted. "General," his sensor officer reported, scales flickering with confusion. "They're dispersing into the cave systems. Internal sensors detect they're establishing pressure zones using mining equipment." Zexthor's primary heart clenched. The humans were supposed to panic, to break under the threat of environmental collapse. Instead, they were improvising, converting industrial equipment into survival systems with impossible speed. "Launch the ground assault," he commanded. "End this quickly." The Valkyrie shock troops, encased in their crystalline battle armor, breached the colony's outer perimeter with ease. But as they pushed inward, they encountered not terrified civilians, but an entire population that had transformed into a guerrilla force within hours. Mining lasers, repurposed as weapons, proved surprisingly effective at cracking Valkyrie armor. Construction vehicles became mobile barricades. Every tunnel and chamber had been turned into a defensive position. And the humans, The humans simply refused to break. Impossible, Zexthor muttered, watching the casualty reports climb. They're operating in sections with no atmosphere. Their emergency suits can't sustain them this long. Sir, his tactical officer interrupted, we're detecting unusual biological readings. The humans, their bodies appear to be adapting to the reduced pressure and toxic atmosphere. Some have survived exposure that should have been instantly fatal. A transmission cut through their command channel. The voice of Sarah Chen, no longer a diplomat, but now the colony's emergency coordinator. This is your final warning, General. Withdraw your forces or witness firsthand why humanity has survived every extinction-level event our homeworld has thrown at us. Zexthor ignored the warning. Release the biotoxins, he ordered. Let's see them adapt to that. The Valkyrie deployed their most sophisticated biological weapons, designed to attack any unarmored organic matter. For a moment, it seemed to work. Hundreds of humans collapsed as the toxins spread through the colony's remaining atmospheric pockets. Then the impossible happened. Sir, his medical officer reported, voice shaking, their bodies are adapting. Their immune systems are responding at rates we've never seen. They're not just surviving the toxins, they're developing resistance to them. The tactical display told a story that defied Valkyrie military doctrine. The humans weren't just fighting back. They were getting stronger. Those who survived the initial exposure became resistant, passing on information about the toxins to others. Their bodies were literally evolving in real time to counter the Valkyrie weapons. Pull back, Zexthor ordered, finally understanding the true horror of what they faced. Pull back now. But it was too late. The humans had turned the tide, emerging from their tunnels with improvised weapons and environment suits cobbled together from mining equipment. More terrifying still were the ones who had seemingly adapted to breathe the toxic atmosphere, their bodies having undergone rapid changes that should have taken generations to evolve. How? Zexthor demanded as his forces retreated in disarray. How do they keep surviving? The answer came in the form of recovered footage from the colony's security systems. It showed humans sharing oxygen masks, treating wounded with basic medical supplies, and adapting industrial equipment into survival gear. But most importantly, it showed them working together, combining their innovative capacity with their physical resilience in ways the Valkyrie had never imagined possible. As his ships lifted off from New Eden, General Zexthor received one final transmission from Sarah Chen. Your mistake wasn't attacking us, General. Your mistake was thinking we needed protection from our environment. The truth is, our environment needed protection from us. We are the apex predators of a death world, and we've spent our entire evolutionary history learning to survive everything the universe has thrown at us. Your weapons, your toxins, your tactics, they're just new challenges for us to adapt to. The defeat at New Eden would become a turning point in Valkyrie military history. They had initiated the attack believing humans were vulnerable because they lacked armor. They retreated with the terrifying realization that humans didn't need armor because they had evolved into something far more formidable, a species that grew stronger with every attempt to destroy them. The Valkyrie High Command Chamber fell silent as the holographic display showed the aftermath of New Eden. Admiral Kexlar stood before his peers, his scales dim with the gravity of his report. The failed invasion had triggered something in the human species that none of them had anticipated, not just resistance, but evolution in real time. They're calling it Operation Prometheus, Kexlar announced, projecting new intelligence data. Humanity's counteroffensive isn't just a military response, it's a demonstration of their species' true capabilities. The display showed human ships approaching Valkyrie outposts, but unlike their previous vessels, these were different. Stripped down, minimal protection, built for speed and maneuverability that would have torn any Valkyrie crew apart from forces alone. How are they surviving those accelerations? Demanded Supreme Commander Yextal, his armored form rigid with disbelief. Their bodies adapt, Kexlar explained. They've developed training protocols that allow them to withstand forces that would shatter our crystalline armor. But that's not the worst part. The footage shifted to show human combat teams breaching Valkyrie stations. The warriors moved with impossible speed, their minimal environmental suits allowing flexibility that the Valkyrie's protective armor couldn't match. More disturbing were their tactics, deliberately exposing themselves to hostile environments to establish advantages the Valkyrie never considered possible. This is footage from Outpost Sigma 7, Kexler continued. The humans breached the station's containment and vented the atmosphere. Our defenders assumed this would force them to retreat. Instead, the assembled commanders watched in horror as the human soldiers continued fighting in the vacuum, their bodies functioning well beyond the theoretical limits of their emergency systems. Some appeared to be operating with suits that had been compromised, their bodies somehow adapting to partial exposure. "We've confirmed this isn't advanced technology," Kexler reported. "Their equipment is actually quite basic by our standards. What we're seeing is biological adaptation. Their bodies are capable of temporarily surviving conditions that would kill any rational species. They've weaponized their own evolutionary adaptability." The display showed more footage. Humans operating in high radiation zones that would cook a Valkyrie inside their armor, surviving decompression events that should have been instantly fatal, continuing to fight with injuries that would incapacitate any other known species. "They're not just surviving," Commander Vexna added, stepping forward. "They're learning. Each encounter with our forces leads to new adaptations. They're studying how our armor works, finding weak points we didn't even know existed. Their bodies actually grow stronger in response to adversity." Supreme Commander Yextol's scales shifted to a pale shade of disbelief. "Surely they can't sustain such biological stress indefinitely." "That's the most disturbing part," Kexler responded. "They recover. Their bodies repair damage that should be permanent. We've observed humans returning to combat within days of injuries that would require months of regeneration for our species. They call it getting stronger through adversity." The tactical display updated to show the current state of the conflict. Valkyrie forces, once confident in their superior protection, were being systematically outmaneuvered by human units that simply didn't operate according to any known biological limitations. "They're not just beating us tactically," Vexna explained. "They're proving that our entire evolutionary approach, developing better armor and protection, may have been a dead end. While we focused on preventing damage, they evolved to embrace it, to learn from it, to grow stronger from it." A new transmission cut through the chamber's displays, footage from a human military broadcast. It showed their soldiers training, deliberately exposing themselves to increasing levels of stress and damage, their bodies adapting and growing stronger with each trial. "This isn't just a war anymore," Kexler concluded. "This is a clash of evolutionary strategies, and I fear we may have discovered why humans never developed natural armor. They never needed it. Their bodies became something far more terrifying, a self-repairing, constantly adapting system that treats every form of damage as a challenge to overcome." The chamber erupted in worried chittering as the implications became clear. The Valkyrie had spent millennia perfecting their armor, believing it represented the peak of evolutionary success. Now they faced a species that had taken a completely different path, one that made them virtually impossible to defeat through conventional means. "They have a saying," Vexna added quietly, "what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. We thought it was just words. Now we understand. It's a literal description of their biology. Every attack that fails to destroy them completely just teaches them how to survive better. We're not fighting a war against their weapons or their technology. We're fighting against their very nature as a species." The silence that followed was broken only by the continuous update of tactical displays, showing human forces advancing across Valkyrie space, each engagement demonstrating new adaptations, new capabilities, new proof that humanity's greatest weapon was not their technology or their tactics, but their fundamental nature as living engines of adaptation and survival. The final confrontation took place in orbit around Valkyrie's prime itself, the crystalline homeworld of the Federation. Admiral Kexlar stood on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, watching as the human fleet approached. Their ships were unlike anything he'd seen before, streamlined vessels that seemed to defy conventional military doctrine, crewed by beings who had turned their own adaptability into a weapon. "They're hailing us," Commander Vexna reported, her scales shifting in the pale light of the binary stars. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing Ambassador Chen. She looked different now, harder, adapted to war, yet her eyes held the same knowing gleam they'd had during that first meeting. "Admiral Kexlar," she greeted him. "I believe it's time we finished what your people started." "You've made your point, Ambassador," Kexlar responded, his voice heavy with the weight of understanding. "Your species' capabilities have been thoroughly demonstrated." "Have they?" Chen's expression remained neutral. "Because I don't think you truly understand yet. What you've seen, our adaptability, our resilience, that's not just how we fight. It's who we are. Every challenge you've presented has only made us stronger." The tactical display showed the human fleet's formation. They were deliberately exposing their ships to Valkyris Prime's intense radiation belts, using the lethal environment as a shield. Their crews were actually adapting to radiation levels that would kill most species, turning the Valkyrie homeworld's natural defenses against them. "Our scientists have studied your evolution," Chen continued. "Your species developed armor because your world was harsh and unforgiving. But Earth was worse. We didn't develop armor because no armor would have been enough. Instead, we became something else, a species that could adapt to anything, survive anything, overcome anything." Kexlar's secondary hearts clenched as new readings appeared on his displays. The humans weren't just surviving in space, they were thriving in it. Their bodies were showing signs of adaptation to zero gravity, to radiation, to every hostile condition space could throw at them. "Look at your own history," Chen pressed. "Your people stopped evolving once your armor was good enough. But humans? We never stop. Every generation is stronger than the last. Every challenge makes us more adaptable. We don't just survive, we transform survival into advancement." The bridge fell silent as images flashed across the screens. Humans living in environments no Valkyrie could survive even with their advanced armor. Deep-sea colonies, volcanic research stations, solar observation posts that should have been lethal to unprotected organic life. "This war has taught us more about our own capabilities than millennia of peace ever did," Chen continued. "Your weapons forced us to adapt faster, your tactics pushed us to evolve new strategies, your technology gave us new horizons to reach for. In trying to destroy us, you've only made humanity stronger." Kexlar's scales paled as he finally understood the full implications. The Valkyrie had engineered their entire civilization around the principle of protection. But humans had become living proof that there was another way. They weren't just a different species, they were evolution's answer to the question, what happens when adaptation becomes limitless? "What are your terms, Ambassador?" he asked quietly. Chen's expression softened slightly. "The same as they were at the beginning, peaceful coexistence. But now you understand why. Not because we're weak, not because we need protection, but because humanity's greatest strength isn't our ability to destroy our enemies. It's our ability to turn them into allies, to share what we've learned about survival itself." The proposal that followed was unprecedented in Valkyrie history. The humans offered to share their understanding of adaptive evolution, to help the Valkyrie break free from their evolutionary dead end of ever-stronger armor. In exchange, they asked only for cooperation in exploring the galaxy together. "Your people perfected protection," Chen concluded. "Mine perfected adaptation. Imagine what we could accomplish if we combined those approaches instead of setting them against each other." As the peace treaty was signed, Kexlar couldn't help but reflect on that first meeting, when he pitied the humans for their lack of armor. Now he understood. Humanity's greatest achievement wasn't surviving without protection. It was transcending the need for it entirely. The war ended not with the destruction of either side, but with a profound shift in how the Valkyrie understood strength itself. They had begun the conflict believing that humanity's lack of armor was a weakness to be exploited. They ended it realizing that humans weren't unarmored at all. Their entire species was evolution's ultimate armor, constantly adapting, eternally becoming stronger. In the centuries that followed, the partnership between humans and Valkyrie would reshape the galaxy. The Valkyrie learned to shed their rigid dependence on physical protection, while humanity's adaptability reached new heights through access to Valkyrie technology. Together, they became living proof that evolution's greatest achievement wasn't in creating perfect armor, but in creating life that could transcend the need for it entirely.